I had already fallen into a coma for 4 days. Then at that point, the only organs that were still functional were my lungs, heart, and brain. Basically, your basic level of functionality. Basically, when that happened, when I first died, I was instantaneously outside of my body. I was up in the back corner of the hospital room, and I could see the team working on me. All of this was told to me in this near-death experience. Like, this is going to happen then, this is going to happen then, and it basically all in order laid out. And I didn't believe it because, of course, none of it had happened yet. I was told it would be diagnosed as terminal a few years after that. My name's Andrew Bauer, and I grew up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And I was born in 1971. In my early years before I went to elementary school, I was part of a gifted class for 2 years. I had a very high IQ, which is something my mother and grandmother also had. We were all members of a group called Mensa, which is for the top 1% of all intelligence levels in the world. Um, and at the age of 7, I there's a severe virus that affected a lot of kids in my old hometown and the surrounding area. All the victims were under the age of 16, and to my knowledge, they never identified what the virus was, but it had the earmarks of things like chronic fatigue syndrome. There was a severe fatigue. There was dehydration. Um, very high fever of 105 to 107 degrees. Basically, your brain boiling inside your skull. And eventually, for the worst of us, there was what they call septicemia, and then septic shock, and then organs shut down. So by the time I got to the point of the near death experience, I had already fallen into a coma for 4 days. And then at that point, the only organs that were still functional were my lungs, heart, and brain. Basically, your basic level of functionality. And within an hour, all three of those shut down. And so they called what they call a code blue team in to work on me. And before this, I was in a void. There was, like, for me, there was nothing that existed. Everything was black. There was no sound. There was no light. There was no feeling. Like, they did what they call I'm trying to remember the name of it, but where they try to use painful stimuli to get you to react, and I was showing no reaction whatsoever. So basically, I was completely comatose. I was gone. And so they declared me clinically dead, and they started working on me uh, with CPR, and then they had defibrillator, they had what they call ampules of epinephrine, which is like a adrenaline shot, and uh, so they were working on me for a total of 6.5 minutes before they were able to restore a heart function. And when basically when that happened, when I first died, I was instantaneously outside of my body. I was up in the back corner of the hospital room, and I could see the team working on me. There was one doctor who stood at the foot of the bed and was kind of giving orders to everybody else. And I remember him specifically because he had a bald spot, which at that time I was only 7. I'd never seen a bald spot before. And especially I wouldn't have been able to see his because he was standing at the foot of my bed. He was over 6 feet tall, and of course I'm lying in bed, so the bald spot was in an area that I couldn't see if even if my eyes had been open and I was conscious. But I remember he had a comb over where he used the hair from the left side of his head to comb over the bald spot. And when I came back, I remember I asked the nurse. I said, I described this doctor. I said, who was this doctor that was working on me? And I described the bald spot and the comb over. And she said, oh, that must be Doctor. I think his name was. Uh, I want to say Johnson or Johansson or something like that. And they brought him in, and he said, "Am I the person you saw?" And well, I can't tell from this angle because I was looking at his face. But I said, can you bend over? And he bent over, and I saw the comb over spot, and I said, "Oh, that's you." And it kind of freaked the nurses out. But anyway, when I went out of my body, yeah, I went from black nothingness to all of a sudden feeling more alive than I'd ever felt before, where everything felt more vivid. Um, Sounds were more crisp. My vision was completely clear in a way that I've never experienced before. And I was scared at first because, being 7 years old, you don't have any concept of death. No one I knew had ever died before. In fact, I lost a friend when I was 12, and then didn't lose a family member until I was in my 20s. So I had never really experienced death in my life. So I had no concept of what was happening to me. And so I was petrified, like, I'm in the corner of a room. How did I get up here? What am I doing here? What happened to me? And I could see this body on the bed, but I didn't recognize myself because I felt like, okay, I'm up here. This is me. So who's that? I felt the separation, in other words. And it took, them saying my name for me to kind of understand that that was me and that something really bad had happened. But then I heard a voice inside my head, a telepathic voice, and it was a very calming, what I've described it as sing-songy, where it almost sounded like melodic music when this being spoke to me. And it was very calming and reassuring. And the voice said, you've passed beyond this life. You're currently dead, but you're okay. You're not. Nothing bad can happen to you now. And I was at first I wasn't very reassured by that statement, but like I said, I had no concept of what was going on. And eventually, when I coded officially, when my brain waves flatlined, and at that point, the being spoke to me again and said, "If you need to, we're going to go to the other side. You need to come with us." And I felt my spirit, or whatever you want to call it, being pulled through the corner of the ceiling, up through the building. And I mean, it was like being guided in flight, where I could see my hometown from several thousand feet up, and I never had seen anything like this. I mean, I had never been in a building taller than 3 stories, except for what trip to New York when I was 5 with my parents for July 4th and the bicentennial 1976. And so I had never seen my town from that angle, and I saw places that I recognized, like my house and my neighborhood and the place that we used to go skiing at. But I very quickly was, moving away from the hospital. And at this point, I hadn't seen the being attached to that voice I was hearing. But then all of a sudden, everything went blank. I felt like I was back in that black nothingness, but only for a brief second. And then when I opened my eyes, even though I didn't have eyes, I didn't have a body anymore. But just like when I next could see something, I was lying on what felt like a bed in an enclosed area where the walls all had were made of this bluish green energy, and it felt, if you know what malleable means, like, like you can move it. Like I could feel the wall, but like it would recoil. Like I couldn't actually touch it. It was just and what I found out later is they can manipulate this energy to create whatever they need to. I called it the room of requirement, like Harry Potter, and later on, where the room or the area takes on whatever they require of it. Whether it's a place for you to acclimate to being on the other side, or a place for you to have your life review, which I had very soon after this, or whatever they just happened to need at that time. And I was surrounded by four beings, including the one that I'd heard in my head, and now I could see him. And um, I found out later that we don't generally, once we cross over, we don't generally hold on to our what they call the residual self image, the way we look now, for very long after we die, unless, of course, we're going to greet somebody that's just passed over who we know, or we're having a near death experience. And so being attached to one specific look is kind of pointless on the other side, because the one body's the same as another. It's just a suit you put on temporarily, and then you take off when you're done with it. But anyway, I like I said, I was surrounded by four beings. The one I call my guide, who's like he's like my brother, and he and I have always been very close, ever since my first experience. And the other three that were with him were what they call trainees, or what interns, whatever term you want to use. Basically, they were beings who wanted to um, do like my guide was doing, who wanted to guide other beings, who wanted to um, welcome them to the other side, to help them follow their life paths, whatever the case might be. And so they would follow a being who has been doing this for a long time, to learn the best ways to do that. And so they were like interning with my guide, and so I never heard them speak. They just would smile at me, or um, nod their heads if he said something, or whatever the case may be, but they didn't actually speak to me. So it was like you only heard this one voice the whole time. It was just my guide and myself that would speak to each other. And like I said, of course, we don't have a body. All communication there was telepathic, and it was a very pure form of communication. It's not like where we have to think about what we're going to say, and we mess up when we talk, and the way we talk, and normally it's not like that. It's very pure. It's instantaneous. You don't have to think about what you want to say. It's they can read your mind, you can read theirs, and so there's that automatic bond, and communication happens very fast. But you can remember and understand all of it, no matter how many beings are speaking to each other. Like you could have 20 beings speaking to each other at the same time, and everybody understands everyone else. Actually an amazing, like it. I remember after my second near death experience, when I came back, it took me a month to learn how to speak again, because I was so used to this different form of communication that I couldn't get used to having to speak again. It was like alien to me. But anyway, once I got acclimated, and my guide said there's an experience that every being must go through when they first cross over. It's called the life review. And so they led me to this other area where there was like this long pod. I can't think of any other word better to describe it. Basically, it looked like an oval shaped bed with a sliding cover that would come up over you. And basically, you were fully encased in this thing. So you were cut off from all outside sight and sound, and you were fully immersed in this experience. And life review is something that almost everybody who's had a near death experience describes as a common theme. And basically, what it is a way to, they want to show you everything that you've said and done during your life, good, bad, or indifferent. Um, and but they show you not just from your perspective, but from the perspective of the people that you said and did these things to. And it's but it's more than just that level of interaction. You get to see the down the line effects. Like, let's say you buy somebody groceries a week. You see somebody struggling and they can't afford groceries. You buy their groceries. Well, maybe that means they can afford their rent that month, and they and their kids don't get kicked out of their apartment. So the kids, um, maybe they do better in school. The father uses that as a teaching moment to teach them, why you should be kind to others. They grew up to be kind to people rather than bitter or angry. And then the people that they either would have hurt or helped, you see how that affected them. So there's all these different levels of effects from just even one simple small action. And it really teaches you how connected all of us really are. And not only that, but how every little thing that we do affects so many other lives around us. And it's an amazing experience. Like I hadn't done anything really that bad by that point. I was 7, and I wasn't an evil child or anything like that. The worst thing I'd ever done, I think I took uh, a small we had a little we call matchbox cars when I was growing up, little metal models of vehicles. And my cousin had one that his father had bought him that was exactly like the car that he drove when my cousin was growing up. And he cherished his car very much. Well, I saw it one day when I was playing at his house and said, oh, it looks cool. And I took it, not even thinking, it's his. I shouldn't take it. I just liked it and I wanted to keep it. So I took it home. And I never realized that after I left, he panicked. Was, Mom, where's my car? I can't find my car. And was crying for 2 or 3 days afterwards. And I felt the pain and the sadness and the nights of sleeplessness and all that. It affected me. Even that little tiny thing affected me so deeply that when I came back, the first thing I wanted to do when I woke up, like a week and a half later, was to give him back his car. And he never blamed me. Even his father never blamed me. It just he was so happy to have his car back. He actually hugged me, and it made me feel good for giving it back to him because I felt his pain in a way that I never had experienced before. Um, but anyway, so once I had the life review, um, it kind of becomes a do what you want to do kind of thing where you get to look around or explore, go where you want to go because you can't be harmed by anything. So it's not like you're going to wander into traffic and get hit by a car. so, um, but the ironic thing about it was both near death experiences right after my life review, I ended up in the exact same place, and I didn't know where it was until after my first experience. Um, it was this beautiful mountain field, and it was full of these wildflowers and colors I'd never seen, uh, kinds that I'd never seen. There was a deep mountain valley below me to my left, another set of mountains across the way. There was a cabin, old style log cabin, looked like it was hundreds of years old. It was in front of me. It was mountain sloped up to the right, to my right, and um, but beyond the cabin, in the distance, about a couple miles away, there was this mountain. I remember that looked kind of like a pyramid, where it had like four distinct sides that all met at the top, but instead of a straight tip like a pyramid would have, it actually slanted off to one side. And I remember that specifically because it was very different looking to me. And when I came back, and was my grandmother was the only person who ever believed my stories when I came back. My parents and church people and everybody else, they didn't believe it. But when I started drawing this mountain, because I kept coming back to my thoughts on a constant basis, and I kept drawing it. And finally, one day, she saw me drawing it, and she said, "That looks so familiar." And she went to we at the time our only resources were things like the Encyclopedia Britannica or a library card. The internet wasn't invented yet, the social media wasn't invented yet, so there was no way to find stuff like that. But she knew it was something in Europe that she'd seen before. And so she went through the European sections, and finally she came upon this one picture, and she brought the book out to me, and she described this to me later, because I don't remember any of this. My memory below the age of 16 is basically almost a blank slate, except for my near-death experiences and certain severe traumas. And she showed me this picture, and it had the exact same slant at the top. And I said, and apparently I said, that's my mountain. That's it. And it was the Matterhorn in Switzerland. Now, I had never heard of the Matterhorn or Switzerland. I had never been anywhere outside of my hometown except New York City one time. I had no idea Europe existed. I had no idea about any of this. So, how could I be seeing this place that I'd never heard of, never seen before, never even seen a picture of? I know you're wondering about my beliefs. Before this, I was raised going to church. My parents, my father was more of a believer than my mother, but both of them wanted me to have that experience of going to church because when I got old enough, they wanted me to be able to make a decision, an informed decision, based on knowing all the facts and not just, going based on what they told me to do or someone else told me to do. So they wanted me to know what church was like and figure out whether it was something I wanted to do when I grew up. Um, but right from the get go, I think, especially after I got back from this first near death experience, I didn't feel comfortable there. Um, I think it was partly because nobody there believed anything I told them. They was always, it's your imagination, you're making it up, because there was a certain narrative to near death experiences that most Christians at that time believed. The tunnel of light, meeting your dead relatives, seeing Jesus and angels and a church, and it was all Christian themed. And because my experience was nothing like that, like I didn't see any of those elements at all. Um, it was they automatically denied my experience and made me feel like I was making it up or imagining things like, oh, you were just, you were out of it, so your brain was imagining things. And it took me more than 20 years. And finally, going around, I used to travel around places to talk about my experiences to small groups or big groups, depending on, what was there. And it was talking to other people like me who'd had experiences and also felt alone, because that's the one thing that's very consistent about people from my generation who had near death experiences. There was no there was no resources for us. There was no internet. There was no connection. IANDS, the International Near Death Experiences Group, actually wasn't even created until the 80s, until 1981, 3 years after I had my first experience. So there just wasn't, there was no books to look up. There was no people to talk to unless you just happen to run into somebody. But being at a place where people are talking about near death experiences or the afterlife or death, people who are interested in that would show up. And then I would be able to talk to them because they would come up to me after the show and would want to tell me their stories and hear more of mine. And so we would compare notes. And I realized finally that I was not alone in this, that there were others like me out there. And I didn't know how many there were, but as long as there was at least one, it was something better than what I'd had. Because I felt so not just alone, but like cut off because my grandmother was the only person who ever believed me. Um, so you know, being around people everywhere you go who think that you're a liar or that you're making it up for attention or that it's just your imagination. It's hard to go through life every single day like that with everybody thinking that you're making it up or that you're lying to them. And I knew I wasn't. But I mean, other than the comb over with the doctor, which could be explained away, I suppose, um, I found out things in both near death experiences actually that later proved to be true. For instance, in my first one, I was given a timeline of events in my personal life that would happen. Um, like I said, I was 7 at that time. I hadn't started first grade yet. But within 3 months of me starting, I was bullied every single day for the next 9 years, from age 7 to 16. From that, I suffered 15 severe brain injuries 12 concussions, 3 skull fractures, a severe lumbar spine injury, stab wound, multiple, I mean, just a lot of injuries, basically. And all of this was told to me in this near death experience. Like, this is going to happen then, this is going to happen then. And it's basically all in order laid out. And I didn't believe it because, of course, none of it had happened yet. But as soon as it started, everything happened exactly in the order I was told. And I had told my grandmother about this when I first came to, and and came home. I remember I wrote it out, every single bit of it, and she said, "Well, don't put too much into that. You can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Where you you're looking for stuff to happen, so it's going to happen." I said, "This is what I was told was coming." I said, "I don't know how else to prove it other than to write it down." And so I wrote that down and I left it with her. And as soon as stuff hard started happening, she actually started keeping track of it. And she would ask me, did this happen? Did this happen? Did that happen? And I would say, yeah, this happened exactly this day. This happened this day. And I told her the whole thing as we went along. And she compared it to what I'd written down when I first came back. And every single bit of it happened exactly the way they told me it would. And it came all, it's still happening even now. Um, because one of the things that resulted from all those brain injuries that I had was a condition called CTE, which is, for those who aren't familiar, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a severe brain condition that results from multiple brain injuries, and a lot of times it's terminal. And I was diagnosed with it in 2017. I was told that was coming. I was told it would be diagnosed as terminal a few years after that. It was in 2021. And so I'm living with that condition that I was told about 40 years ago this year. Or, well, anyway, 40, no, more than 40 years ago, 47 years ago, in my first near death experience. And then the second near death experience, I was, this, like, first of all, I should preface this. Time does not pass there like it does here. Like, I was gone for 6.5 minutes the first time, 7.5 minutes the second time. Here on Earth, but on the other side, I experienced a full year the first time and over a decade the second time. So, like, I spent over 5 years exploring the Milky Way galaxy. I went to all these other planets and stars and nebula and everything, the second time around. And then I spent the other 5 years being taught about not only the future of humanity, where we're going, like what's going to happen, where things are going for us, but also how the universe works and what happens to that. And what I found is that all the things that I was told have started to come to pass, especially the ones I really noticed have been the ones with the universe. There's a point of no return. I never reached it, because I was told pretty much all the way along that I didn't belong there, that this was only a temporary situation, that I would be going back. I didn't want to either time, and that's, I found out, is also a shared trait of most people who have near death experiences. Um, that it's so beautiful and wonderful there, that everything is so amazing that it's I compare it like going to Disney World for vacation and then being dumped off into a sewer. That's the equivalent of what it's like to come back to Earth from there. It's not even, there's no comparison. And but I was told that I needed to come back, and that's something most of us are told, that we need to share our stories with other people